Dear diarrhea full of shit. Just play along with myself and I. No one else. Yo, I'm so legit. I don't have anything to say, so I figured I'd say some shit. I'm a YouTuber. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Um, Leave a comment, share, hit the notification bell. Blah blah blah. I'm just, watching some YouTube and mostly listening, but watching some. And it popped up another suggestion or whatever for like an airplane crash. Now, this could be all complete and utter bullshit, and it could be initiated just by Ben or Brian just to be like a literal troll, just like, oh, fuck, oh. I'll make a story about, a snake that ate its tail and succeeded. And they'll make the little picture, or whatever, and it's like nothing makes sense, because that's who Ben and Brian are. And then he'll turn on his camera, that he house cam that he hacked into of Mrs. Jones, doing the dishes, and he'll beat off to that, because he's Ben, and or Brian, or an anime character with cat ears, giant eyes, tits, the size of a Buick with a tail going up its own, well, a tail and a dick going up over its back and up its own ass, because that's Ben and Brian. So he's got that, covered, and maybe he's got some sort of godlike mode thing that kind of turns him on, like Mrs. Jones. She doesn't even know I'm watching her, or whatever. Not to sound like the literal butthead from Beavis and Butthead, but they're degenerates. They take degeneracy to a whole new level. They're weasels, they're scoundrels, they're cowards. There's a difference between a pussy and a coward. I mean, a coward is obviously a pussy, but a pussy isn't necessarily a coward. Um, but Ben and Brian are like the ultimate cowards. You they would not only not take action, to save a child, but they would take negative action to sacrifice a child over themselves. That's who Ben and Brian is. And they're always tech people, computer people, whether they work in that industry or whether they work at 7-Eleven and just go home and spend 4 hours from the time they get off work, from the time they go to bed, playing video games, writing code, amateur, or whatever. Ben and Brian, they are the destroyers of worlds, civilizations, everything good, holy, and noble. The reason they're drawn to technology and magic air, as I call it, is because they get results. It's something that they can dedicate, you know, their mind and their emotions to, and get results that they like. So, and like I said, they're weird. They're degenerates. They're just. I mean, the human species as a whole is kind of fucked up. But like I said, Ben and Brian take it to a weird level. They're the ones not only who are addicted to pornography or whatever. And you just said you spent 6 hours the other day masturbating. Yeah, to collages that I made. Isn't that the same? Not hardly. Porn tends to put my dick in the dirt, but um, again, they ain't got anything that'll do it for me, so I gotta make my own. Like I said, I take little pieces this here and there. But anyway, they're the ones watching some chick suck off a horse, or some shit. That's the guy, when you call, 1-800 fix my computer, that's the guy who answers the phone. A guy gets turned on by some chick sucking off a horse, you know, or getting fucked by a dog, you know. And the irony of doggy style, just oh man, just that's just who Ben and Brian are. But anyway, and there's a good chance they're into that underage shit. Okay. Um, And if they're into panty shit, like I said, it's wearing it on their head, wearing it themselves, chewing on it, and they have to be dirty, like dirty, dirty, like yellow and brown, dirty. Because that's who Ben and Brian are. Well, like I said, generally humanity is kind of fucked up in that department anyway, but Ben and Brian, the people who fix your fucking computers, they take it to a whole new level of what the fuck degeneracy. You know, fuck their mothers. That's where that shit comes from. Okay, it ain't from Tom the mechanic or John the electrician. It's from Ben the fucking tech support. Or Brian the 7-Eleven cashier. Who spends basically all of his waking hours when he's not at work playing video games. And writing, making his own mods. So he can make his own characters and that's why that shit exists. Anyway, and then you've got people who actually do work, in like tech who capitalize on that. Like, hey, grow your dick 3 inches in 2.5 days by fucking this fruit only found in Guatemala. Anyway, well, you sure know a lot about the porn industry. I just remember it. It's like, what the fuck is this? Like I said, I'm aware it exists. I might quickly, use something, or search for something or find something, you know what I mean? But anyway, I lost my damn train of thought. 7 minutes in, wasting time on that shit. Oh yeah, AI. Ben and Brian are going to have field days with this. And like I said, there's really no rhyme or reason for it. They just might decide, they might see a commercial in passing, on a billboard, or they might be walking through Walmart and be walking through the hardware section and be like, oh, these fucking guys who work with their hands and shit, and they'll go home and like write a bad review, on a tool just because, it makes their dick feel a little bit bigger, Ben and Brian, they do shit for shit, their own fucking reasons, the whole making up animals and cleaning barnacles off of whales and shit, that's Ben and Brian. But it's just on a whim, you know what I mean? They just might decide to do something. I'll make a fake news story where somebody took a shit and clogged up the toilet and it overflowed and like flooded the street, man. God mode. Ben and Brian. But or it doesn't even necessarily have to be on God mode. It could just be Ben and Brian. There's a pimp, slam another energy drink, take another puff of that one hitter. Or off the bong one hitter. Who the fuck am I kidding? But there's different variations of Ben and Brian, and like I said, some of them are actually fairly high-functioning, high-caliber dudes, but they're still Ben and Brian on the degeneracy scale. Who fell out of the degeneracy tree. They're still Ben and Brian, just with maybe a little different, outfit, different job, and a little bit different demeanor. They're a little bit more confident. They're a little bit more hold my beer, I got you, bro. Type of mentality. Where Ben, the lower level Ben and Brian are kind of like, whatever. Hi, So yeah, there's all different types of Ben and Brian, but they are all Ben and Brian. So, anyway, you're welcome. I'm not wrong about that, But it just kind of makes you think, what the fuck, with all these planes. Because I think I opened a folder, all the shit, the door coming off, the wheel falling off, the engine falling off, the engine exploding, shit like that. This is all shit out of a movie. And then finding out, the dude, was fucking over safety, again, to make himself rich, you know, and he's worth, millions, if not billions, and he's sacrificing people's safety, and people have, died, or I don't know if there's been any fatalities, but, he's willing to risk it, or maybe he's calculated the odds. Maybe he knows, if an engine falls off, so what? The wing ain't gonna fall off. And the odds of maybe it hitting, somebody when it hits the ground, it's worth the risk. If I can pocket another 4 million, a year, it's like that is evil. They, and it is totally possible that he goes to church and is a Christian and thinks he's a good one, because that's the human condition. Because the more complicated, more complex something is, then more prone it is to failure. Everything has a flip side. Technology has a flip side. Humanity has a flip side. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to shout that out because I did that audio presentation talking about, would you get on a plane, that didn't have a pilot? Would you get on a bus that didn't have a driver? And maybe that's why that popped up, because I had mentioned that, because of the algorithm and AI and stuff. But I remember Mr. Pellet, talking about that. Better Bachelor, might as well shout him out, seeing as I'm shouting everybody out now. It was a while ago, but I remember, he was mentioning that, this stuff. It was in the news, and he'd actually said, it's always been said that flying is, your chances of crashing, in a plane crash are actually very, very low, But he was like, these days I'm not so sure that I would get on a plane. And I guess we're still there. I've kind of stopped looking at him, I mean, you have to, decipher, is it real or is it not? But it's kind of almost pointless these days, and unless you have access to like the actual NTSB, like safety records. Nobody's gonna have access to that unless they're, in the aviation or in the know on that shit. It's like, is this shit real? Let me check, or is it just Ben and Brian? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And I also forgot to mention in my last video, as far as credit cards go and stuff. My Future Bestie Cool Breeze has mentioned this before, and I, of course, just blasted over it and forgot to mention it. But if you pay the minimum, you not only, it's not just that the minimum gets carried over, but you have to pay, interest. And, it's compound interest. So it's interest upon interest, So basically, you accrue debt at warp speed. So, credit card companies are not your friend. Insurance companies are not your friend. Mortgage companies are not your friend. Like my APR on my mortgage, I should know this, but I don't. But it's really low. It's like 4.9 or some shit like that. It's probably on my bill. But like I said, I never cared. I know it was really low. I got in at the right time, and it's fixed. So I got a low, monthly payment, and I got a low APR. It's, I don't, I don't. If you pay your credit card in full, I don't. It's only got an APR if you don't pay it in full. But I don't know, But I guess that's all I wanted to say. Baby, hey, hey. Shit, 14. Um, yeah, that's all I'll say.